Hey guys, tonight we journey to a place where time doesn't quite work the way you expect. The air is dry and golden. The wind feels like it remembers too much. You're standing at the edge of the Sahara, but this isn't just endless sand and mirage. This is the gateway to a forgotten city, one that once buzzed with more scholars than soldiers, more parchment than papyrus, more libraries than churches. You've probably never walked into a desert expecting to find a university older than most European capitals. But here we are. You will learn quickly that the hottest thing in this city wasn't tea. The weather, it was the ideas. Oh, and fair warning. If you think you're going to survive this journey without your worldview getting gently flipped, good luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The one you've heard in cartoons or road trip jokes, some mythical middle of nowhere. Before the libraries and scholars, there was nothing here but a lonely well. It's not just quiet, it's waiting. The city is dormant, like an ancient computer still humming in sleep mode. You swear the air thickens with memories the moment you step over the invisible threshold. The legend goes that a Tuareg woman named Timbuktu lived beside it, keeping watch for nomads crossing the desert. They blend into the ground, as if grown from the sand rather than built on top of it. The streets are narrow, dusty veins between earth and hearts, and the smell. He's not memorizing scripture, he's writing a treatise on astronomy. Everyone here, it seems, is either teaching, learning, copying, or debating. The city hums like a beehive of thought. You hear snatches of argument as you pass. Whether zero can be negative, whether healing herbs work better with prayer, whether a man can lead if he hasn't studied ethics. Someone even mutters about the moon controlling tides 500 years before Newton will discover it. And no, he's not from Arabia. He's local, West African. His teacher, probably an imam who studied in Cairo, traded with Persia, and debated Greeks. One scroll shows a diagram of constellations, labeled in Arabic script. You're walking through a memory of when the world cared deeply, maybe obsessively, about thinking, writing, debating. A place where truth wasn't declared dead, was discussed. Until the sun dipped behind the dunes. Another describes ethical rules for merchants. Another outlines treatment methods for fevers. It's a library without shelves, a treasure without locks. And no one's watching, because, in Timbuktu, knowledge was meant to circulate. She's moving fast. Purposefully, she's either delivering them to her father's shop or preparing for her own studies. You don't get the feeling she's limited by the walls around her. In fact, these walls seem to bend for the educated. The teen's father might sell salt slabs the size of tombstones. But this boy, he's aiming to chart the heavens. Just quiet buildings and thousands of manuscripts hidden in corners, stored in cubbies, wrapped in cloth, protected from heat, rats, and time itself. Because in Timbuktu, wisdom was wealth, and the people protected it like gold. Its owner is too deep in conversation to notice. They're arguing about the legal nuances of inheritance. Under Islamic law, you pause and lean in. It's complicated. You don't catch every word, but the energy is unmistakable, passionate, precise, respectful. No one's proven it, but the manuscripts hint at it. Diagrams too perfect to be decorative. Notes too precise to be accidents. A doorway wooden, cracked, almost invisible against the mud wall. You step through. Inside, it's cooler, quieter. Dust motes drift lazily through light beams. And on the floor, scrolls, dozens of them, carefully stacked, some tied with leather cord, others left half open. They smell faintly of musk and ink and time, like a TEDx panel, except in robes and sandals. A mix of sun-baked clay, old books, and something faintly metallic like ink. What's certain is that by the time you're standing here in your imagination, somewhere around the 1200s to 1300s, something incredible is already starting to happen. When they needed water, they'd stop at her place. They called it Timbuktu, which means the place of book. From a woman and a well came a name that would echo through history. But the real city, oh, it was once the center of the intellectual universe for an entire continent, maybe even the world. NA, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It crumbles like shortbread. That same texture once covered thousands of structures here, including schools, mosques, and homes, all of them repositories of something much more delicate. Knowledge. The wind that brushes your face is warm. It doesn't just whisper, it hisses softly, like pages flipping by themselves. You're somewhere in modern-day Mali, in West Africa, but your feet are stepping into the past. And here, beneath your feet, there's an entire civilization tucked beneath the dunes scholars are still trying to fully excavate. It's not buried in gold or bones, but in brittle manuscripts and black ink, in pages that flake apart when touched. You trudge across coarse sunburnt earth that looks barren to the untrained eye. But if you listen, really listen, there are stories here, the kind etched in script rather than stone. They say sand hides secrets better than any jungle or ocean. Some call this the African Alexandria. Others, more humbly, call it what the locals always did, Timbuktu. Tonight, we're beginning just outside of Etat, the moment when it started to matter. You walk into the city, not through a gate, but through a sensation, heat on your skin, dryness in your throat, and an eerie hush. The houses here are strange to your modern eyes. They're low and flat-roofed, made of mud brick, with tiny windows and walls, the color of toast. You brush against a wall and flake off a bit of dried plaster. But here's the weird part. No towering no monumental palaces. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's rise was inevitable thanks to geography and trade or just a fluke of timing. Like intellectual lightning in a clay bottle, you pass a teenager hunched over a goatskin parchment, scrolling lines of Arabic by oil lamp. And that's not rare. A camel groans nearby, tethered loosely, and it's not just the men. You spot a young woman carrying a bundle of books wrapped in dyed fabric. Here's the fringe bit. Some researchers believe Timbuktu may have even hosted secret mathematical guilds, small groups that used coded geometry to design irrigation systems and map the stars. You stop in a shadowed alley, not because you're lost, but because something catches your eye. You bend down. The moment settles around you. Quiet, but heavy. You're not just walking through a forgotten city. The first time you hear the name Timbuktu, it probably sounds like a joke, a punchline, a cartoonish nowhere. People say things like all the way to Timbuktu, as if it's the furthest, most unreachable place imaginable. But now that you rehear feeling the grit of Saharan wind against your skin, you realize something. Jokes are usually born from misunderstanding. Timbuktu has begun blossoming into the heartbeat of a sprawling intellectual network. Picture it. A city with no natural resources, no rivers, no lush green valleys, and yet it's magnetic. Traders, scholars, mystics, builders, all drawn here, as if the city hums with some invisible frequency only dreamers can hear. What draws them? Knowledge, pure and simple. He's tapping a stylus on a wooden tablet, guiding them through a passage of lore. In its prime, the city hosted three major centers of learning, Jingaba, Cdya, and the most famous of them all. Each had its own personality, its own roster of scholars, its own flavor of intellectual swagger. Think of them as the Ivy League of the desert. The students repeat it in sing-song cadence. This isn't just education. It's oral memory turned into ritual. Heated debates, translations of Greek and Persian texts. Students from as far as Egypt and Morocco all came to soak in the brilliance. He's whispering to a potential buyer, explaining that this particular text is a first-generation copy of a famous North African astronomer's commentary. During book bans or religious tensions, entire networks existed just to move manuscripts secretly from one city to another. This is Timbuktu, not as you were told it's some faraway joke, but as it was lived. Vibrant, passionate, deliberate, a place where the human thirst for understanding rose higher than minarets and stretched wider than the desert horizon. They'd hide them in camel saddlebags, bake them into loaves of bread, or tuck them under layers of fabric in market carts. Imagine risking your life not for gold or spices but to preserve someone's philosophy, homework from 900 years ago. That's commitment. And if you listen closely, you might still hear a whisper in the wind, repeating lines from some old poem copied 1,000 years ago, still echoing in a city that refuses to be forgotten. The buyer raises his eyebrow, unconvinced. He asks about the ink, the date, the accuracy, the chain of transmission. It's less like buying a book, more like acquiring a piece of sacred history. You didn't just learn theology here. You learned astronomy, grammar, ethics, arithmetic, and even veterinary medicine. His ink is made from crushed acacia pods and soot. His handwriting is so delicate it looks printed. You want to ask him what he's writing, but something tells you not to interrupt. A soft hum of evening prayer winds through the air, but it mingles with conversation, with laughter, with the scratch of pen on parchment. Even in darkness, Timbuktu doesn't rest. Not really. The room is so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat echo off the mud walls. One student might be reciting Quranic verses, while another calculates the circumference of the earth using shadows and sticks. You feel like you've stumbled into a university lecture, except everyone's barefoot and nobody's checking their phone. A manuscript found here contains measurements of the Earth's radius with eerie precision. This wasn't guesswork. These scholars knew what they were doing just without the satellites. Turbaned merchants hawk spices and incense. Leather-bound books change hands like precious gems. Everyone talks fast. Everyone's bartering. But it's not loud, it's purposeful. Like everyone understands, time is a limited resource, and each idea traded is another moment borrowed from eternity. And few places in history have been more misunderstood than this sun-drenched marvel rising out of the West African dust. Timbuktu. The name hums in your mind, known as a joke, but as an echo. It carries weight, it carries history, and it starts to feel familiar. Like you should have always known it mattered. The syllables fall like soft hoofbeats. Timbuktu. Mysterious, melodic, majestic, almost mythical, but very, very real. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But no matter the origin, the result was undeniable. A thriving metropolis of ideas. Tonight, it's the early 1300s. The houses look sturdier, flat-roofed, and built to outlast the seasonal winds. There's an adobe mosque ahead, its towers crusted with ancient logs jutting out like wooden porcupine spines. This is the Jingabur Mosque. No bell towers, no stained glass, just walls that have stood for centuries sheltering not just prayers, but pages. You pass a group of salt traders unloading massive rectangular blocks from their camels. Salt is wealth, here cut in slabs and traded like bars of silver. But follow those traders a bit farther and you'll see them heading straight for a bookshop. Yes, a shop selling handwritten books, manuscripts, copied with obsessive care on sheepskin and paper hauled across thousands of miles. Because in Timbuktu, information is the ultimate status symbol. Historians still debate whether Timbuktu's cultural explosion was purely Islamic in nature, or a blend of older, local traditions, oral, mystical, animist-led, under the veneer of Arabic script and Islamic scholarship. You wander through the early city streets. They're wider now than before. You linger at a corner and eavesdrop on a group of teenage students, boys and girls, alike sitting cross-legged around a teacher. Timbuktu didn't invent universities, but it absolutely made them cool. And don't let the mud walls fool you. Inside, the classrooms were vibrant. Wait, that last part, not an exaggeration. You reach a small, square building where an old man is painstakingly copying a manuscript by oil lamp. And then, in the market just beyond that scribe's quiet corner, the city explodes in color. One merchant holds up a manuscript wrapped in indigoted cloth. And here's your quirky tidbit. Timbuktu had book smugglers. You lean back against a sun-warmed wall, absorbing it all. As twilight settles over the city, lanterns flicker to life, because here, sleep isn't a pause, it's just another state of learning. You wake not really awake, but deeper into the dream somewhere around the 14th century. Timbuktu is no longer just a stop on a trade route. It's the destination. A group of students reclines on carpets, sipping sweet tea as they debate the ethical implications of lending money with interest. Their teacher, an older man with a beard like a river delta, calmly pokes holes in each argument, pushing them toward sharper logic. He grins when one of them stumbles. In Timbuktu, failure is a sport, and the game is won by those who keep arguing. The caravan bells ring louder, the robes grow more ornate, and the very air feels thick with anticipation. You're entering its golden age. One advises hanging specific verses of the Quran above doorways. Another suggests placing crushed blue stones beneath one's bed. The scholars walked the same streets as traders. After all, a man in emerald robes paces slowly, dictating to a scribe seated on a cushion. You hear snatches of the text. Something about the position of stars relative to the planting of millet. A blend of astronomy and agriculture. The man speaks calmly, but every few steps he pauses to revise his phrasing precision. Matters here, a poorly written idea is like a cracked amphora. It won't hold water, and it certainly won't last. This one is about how light bends, he says. Nothing conclusive. Of course, just hint. But the idea that a medieval scholar in Timbuktu might have stumbled onto the physics of vision, it's enough to make your pulse skip. A gentle breeze carries the scent of ink, spices, and worn parchment. Somewhere nearby, the rhythmic scratching of a quill continues well into the darkness. You imagine the books being copied tonight will outlive the scribe's grandchildren. Written when your ancestors still thought the world floated on turtles. You laugh, quietly. He doesn't. Light has been bending a long time, he adds, then gently rolls the scroll back up. And when camels brought gold from the mines of Bambuk, or the salt from Taudini, they also brought stories, books, and brilliant minds, hungry for a quiet place to study. Timbuktu became that sanctuary. They received written credentials, recommendations, sometimes even letters of scholarly lineage proof they studied under specific masters. It's not exactly a bachelor's degree, but it carries serious weight. If you had the right parchment in your satchel, you could travel the length of the Islamic world and be welcomed at any center of learning. It's all around, whispering in Arabic, singing in symbols, dreaming in diagrams. You are standing at the very heart of a forgotten renaissance, and you're only just beginning to understand what was lost, and what might still be found beneath the dust. So while Timbuktu dazzled with science and reason, it also made room for the unseen, the mystical, the maybe, because here, as in all rich cultures, logic and law weren't enemies, they were roommates. He won't understand most of what's said tonight, but he's here to absorb the atmosphere. Just being present among scholars is its own kind of education. The streets bustle with scholars quoting Ibn Khaldun one minute and haggling over peppercorn prices the next. It's a city where the sharp scent of ink mingles with frankincense, and philosophy is traded just as eagerly as salt and gold. You duck into a shaded courtyard where date palms sway lazily overhead. This period, roughly from the 1300s through the 1500s, is when the city begins to glow from within. One vendor sells ink pots made from carved wood. Another offers paper rough and fibrous, imported from Egypt. A third older man sits cross-legged behind a pile of scrolls and pages. You ask him, softly, what he sells. He answers in Arabic, French, and finally, a heavily accented English. I sell memories. You see new buildings, rise mosques. Yes, but also homes with private libraries, student dormitories, and bustling manuscript shops. Even here, in the middle of festivity, you catch whispers of scholarly gossip. Did you hear Sheikh al-Bakri is translating that ancient Persian text on dream interpretation? One elder shakes his head in mock disapproval. Dreams again. Next thing you know, someone will write a treatise on goat psychology. They laugh, but you can't help but wonder if someone has. Gold dust may line the purses of merchants, but it's knowledge that adorns their shelves. In one circle, men argue about free will. In another, women share herbal remedies, carefully noting symptoms and lunar phases. You begin to realize that education here isn't about status, it's about identity. To be a citizen of Timbuktu is to be curious. If you own a rare book here, you don't just have status, you have power. You walk past a wedding celebration, drawn by the sound of rhythmic clapping and lutes. This city takes its thinking seriously, but not solemnly. Jokes are folded into debates like mint into tea, and here is a slice of the strange. Some manuscripts from this era include detailed descriptions of how to protect a home from jinn spirits of the desert. Historians still argue whether this flourishing was fueled by local initiative or external influence. Was it organic genius, or the ripple effect of trade with North Africa and the Middle East? You peer into a long, arched hallway lined with flickering lanterns. A small boy sits nearby, holding a rolled-up manuscript in his lap, his eyes wide. You step out again into the daylight and find yourself in a plaza ringed with small stalls. You believe him. He picks up a manuscript with trembling hands and opens to a page filled with jagged script and geometric diagrams. Here comes the fringe again. Buried among some of the less manuscripts are documents that suggest early experiments with optics, concave mirrors, lenses, even a kind of primitive camera, and perhaps most astonishing of all, students graduated from these institutions. Night falls again. You sit under a low-hanging moon. The stars absurdly bright in the desert sky, and maybe in this city of sand and thought, the past isn't behind you. You step into the mosque just after dawn, when the world is quiet enough to hear thought itself. It doesn't look like much from the outside, a blocky, earth-toned structure with logs jutting from its walls, like ribs, frozen mid. You step past a carved wooden door and into a series of low-ceilinged rooms, each one buzzing with whispers. Not the whispers of ghosts, though. Those wouldn't feel out of place, but the murmurs of students, reciting lines aloud to themselves. This is where the real magic happens. Not in silence, but in exchange. One man reads aloud from a thick volume, while 10 others scribble furiously. The manuscripts are stored in leather cases, some faded, some richly dyed. There is no decimal system, here just the memory of the librarian, and the soft guidance of elders who know which texts hide where. You spot treatises on astronomy, sermons, legal commentaries, poetry, farming techniques, and even romantic advice. A student interrupts to challenge a phrasing. The teacher pauses, then offers a sly grin. But the shape of it is unmistakable, an invocation to seek knowledge, even unto China. As one manuscript translates it, its strength came from the people, the scholars, scribes, and wanderers who passed through it, each one carrying questions like torches. He bows slightly to the teacher, who takes the scroll with both hands. The room falls silent. This, he announces, is a newly arrived copy of Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, translated not out of exhaustion but reverence. You're walking not through a building, but a living brain, a beating, whispering archive of humanity, and in this moment, the walls feel alive with thought, uncorrected by our brothers in Tuat. Merchants open stores, students rush with books tied in cloth. A child runs past you, carrying a slate board covered in chalk. You feel the energy shift. This is not just news, this is an event. Even today, you can feel them flickering in the silence. The quote floats in your mind, bridging deserts and dynasties. A lion means strength. A scorpion means betrayal. Dreaming of onions, it could mean hidden secrets, or just that you're hungry. You can almost hear questions echoing from centuries past. One room, especially, draws you in. The students are sprawled out, drawing diagrams with sticks in the dirt. Maybe it's still there now, waiting for fingers like yours to brush across its pages. They debate not just the math, but the philosophy behind it. Can perfection exist in nature? One asks. Another counters. What if the curve of a river is just a straight line? The doesn't believe in rules. And you're lucky enough to be here before the storm. It has a raised platform at one end and rows of cushions leading up to it. You found a classroom. The real kind. Some of these texts are influenced by ancient Greek thinkers, others by North African mystics. All of them share one thing in common: they treat dreams as maps, not mysteries. You wonder how many scholars here took naps purely for research purposes. So, you've been reading Al-Ghazali again? He asks. The others chuckle. Debate is praise here. Agreement is considered mildly lazy. In Arabic, in Songhai, in Fulani, students began as apprentices, moved on to deeper studies, and eventually after years were awarded formal degrees. These were handwritten on parchment, and often included a list of the teachers under whom the student had studied, creating a scholarly lineage, not unlike a medieval resume. In a world without LinkedIn, reputation was bound by ink and memory. Whatever its purpose, by the time you've arrived, it's an intellectual engine. Some say as many as 25,000 students came through its courtyards over the centuries, rivaling Oxford and Bologna, but with better mint tea. Maybe even Latin, if one of them's feeling especially nerdy today. But inside, you're about to enter one of the oldest universities in the world. It's passed hand to hand, voice to voice, ink to fragile ink. You see students squinting at scrolls, each one copying by hand their own edition, an early slow-motion version of the printing press. The air smells like dust, sweat, oil lamps, and goat-hide satchels. And strangely, hope, a place where the walls remember the rise and fall of minds sharper than obsidian, and where the scent of ink has never quite left the air. There's no bell tower, no stone spire, just sunlight sliding in through high narrow windows, striping the mud brick walls in long shadows. Here at knowledge isn't locked away behind admission fees or fluorescent lighting. You follow a corridor that opens into a courtyard filled with flickering lanterns and straw mats. Historians still argue whether it was originally intended as a school or just a mosque with an unusually ambitious book club. You pass a room lined with cubbyholes, each one stuffed with scrolls. And now the quirky bit. One dusty corner houses a series of manuscripts on dream interpretation, ranging from the divine to the downright bizarre. You ease deeper into the mosque, where the architecture gets more intimate, low-arched doorways, domed rooms where the acoustics bounce voices in odd directions. The teacher here is younger, animated. He's discussing Euclidean geometry and its applications in irrigation. And here is a detail that sticks in your mind: had a system of academic rank. You sit for a moment on the edge of a stone bench and run your fingers over a carved inscription in the wall. It's faded, almost gone. And yet, for all the grandeur, was never about show. It didn't need marble pillars or stained glass to prove it mattered. There's a knock at the doorway. A student enters, holding a tightly wrapped manuscript. The scroll will be copied, studied, debated, and perhaps, if it survives the heat, the termites, the time it will rest here for centuries more. As you rise and begin to leave the mosque, your steps grow slower. You step back into the sun. It's higher now, and the air shimmers slightly around you. The city stirs with morning activity, and you think, once again, this isn't a relic. This is a renaissance in real time. You follow the dusty scent of cumin and candle wax through a side street that widens into the clamor of the marketplace. But unlike any bazaar you've wandered in daydreams before, this one hums with something stranger than commerce. You're not surrounded by crates of oranges or bolts of silk. No, they're out in the open, changing hands in haggles and trades, carried in cloth bundles under arms, stacked in piles on market mats beside salt, indigo dye, and incense. Welcome to the manuscript marketplace, place where books are alive and their value often exceeds a camel's weight in gold. Here, in the heart of Timbuktu, the most prized items don't glitter, they rustle. He's showing off a rare commentary on logic by an 11th century philosopher from Cordoba. Some were describing techniques for eye operations, wound dressing, and even diagnosing infectious diseases. But what's not debated, the commitment. These weren't dusty books, read once and shelved forever. They were used, tested, updated, and passed on like secret family recipes. Recipes for the ink include lemon juice, plant ash, and other organic compounds. Scholars still find faint traces under certain lights, entire hidden notes whispered beneath the primary text. Possession of a rare commentary is like owning a private jet, and the ability to quote obscure scholars by heart. His voice threads between the stalls like silk. People stop to listen. Some hum along. When asked what's inside, he simply says, "Manuscripts, too delicate to show." Vendors slowly roll up their scrolls and cover their tables. A child carries home a single page of poetry, cradling it like a pet. A merchant tucks away a volume in his robes as carefully as a soldier sheathing a sword. They sleep now. You ask if he's read them all. He smiles. Not all. Some are for the next life. And then, as if sensing your curiosity, he adds, "There are texts here written by women, by travelers, by people with visions." Not all knowledge comes with credentials. He looks away, as though already talking to another century. Others continue browsing manuscripts with Here, even music is soaked in scholarship. Pure prestige. If a city's soul is measured by what it values most, Timbuktu's is made of parchment and ink. Margins were rarely empty. These scholars made use of every space, and some messages weren't meant for every reader. manuscripts describe how to check pulses, examine urine, and isolate patients centuries before Europe figured out that rats and fleas are a bad combo. Every scroll you saw, every line you read was a window into a world that refused to be ignorant, even when empires rose and fell around it. And somewhere, maybe just out of view, another scroll is being unrolled. He's deep in conversation with another vendor, arguing over the nuances of Aristotle's ethics as interpreted through Islamic philosophy. You listen in just long enough to catch a sentence you want to forget. To know yourself is not the end of learning. It is where learning begins. A moment of silence follows. Then both men burst out laughing, as if they just cracked the code of the universe, or at least told a really good logic joke. A group of children is reciting poetry beside a cart overflowing with scrolls. Their teacher, a silver-haired woman with a voice like warm honey, stops them mid-stanza. "What does the metaphor mean?" she asks. One child shyly answers, "That knowledge is like the desert wind. You don't see it, but you feel it." She nods. "Good. But also, it changes you. You get goose," which is impressive, considering it's 105 degrees out. The buyer, a stern-faced merchant in green robes, inspects it closely, then raises one skeptical eyebrow. "Is this the original ink?" he asks. "Or was it copied into what?" The boy doesn't flinch. "Medical treatises," he says, thumbing through pages. "This one is about fevers. This one describes cataract surgery." You blink. Did he just say surgery? To what? But under the eye of Imam Hassan, see the margin note. A tiny scribbled mark confirms the chain of custody. The merchant nods. The deal is done. Books. And not just on dusty shelves, or tucked behind glass like relics. You linger at a stall where a young boy, no older than 11, unrolls a scroll with a flourish that would make a Vegas magician proud. And yes, there were receipts. Scholars here would often draft formal contracts when buying a book, detailing the text's provenance, who wrote it, who copied it, how accurate the edition was. A few are sealed with wax, others are worn soft at the edges, dog-eared by time and fingers long gone. There's no digital backup, no cloud. If a scroll like this disappears, so do the thoughts it contains. You've heard of Timbuktu had its own intellectual blockchain. 6 centuries earlier, you stroll deeper into the market, past a row of sellers displaying manuscripts in protective leather sleeves. One vendor invites you to sit. You do. He carefully unwraps a cloth bundle and reveals a stack of manuscripts so well preserved they could have been copied yesterday. Yes, Timbuktu's doctors weren't just prescribing herbs and prayers. Historians still argue whether these medical texts were mostly original or heavily based on translations from Greek and Arabic sources. You walk a bit farther, drawn by a soft humming sound. And here's your fringe fact for the hour. Some Timbuktu manuscripts are written in invisible ink. Yes, real invisible ink. You drift toward a man surrounded by scrolls on philosophy. It hits you then. This marketplace isn't about profit. It's about pride. Knowledge is currency. You pass a street musician strumming a lute, singing verses attributed to a 13th century Sufi mystic. You stop at one last stall where a weathered man sits beside a locked chest. The sun begins to dip, casting long amber shadows across the market. And you walk out of the manuscript market, not richer in gold, but heavier with thought. The wind picks up again. It smells of myrrh and ink and the ever-whispering desert. You've wandered through the narrow alleys, inhaled the scent of ancient ink, and glimpsed the parchment-strewn heart of Timbuktu. But now you're stepping into a different layer of the city, the one behind closed doors, where kings built kingdoms, not just with armies, but with bookshelves. Welcome to the quiet, lavish world of Mali's scholar kings. This isn't the palace of some warlord dripping in swords and paranoia, but in one room, floor to ceiling, are manuscripts wrapped, stacked, labeled, and organized like a scholar's fantasy vault. In another, a young woman explains a star chart to her tutor, using a brass armillary sphere imported from the Mediterranean. You're not at court. You're in a think tank. It's clear. This king, or perhaps a high-ranking noble, doesn't just fund scholars. He studies alongside them. He's credited with turning Timbuktu from a dusty trading post into an educational capital. No, this is the residence of a man who sponsors debate tournaments the way Roman emperors hosted gladiator games. In the center, a small group listens to a storyteller, and there, seated on a carved wooden dais, is a king. Others argue that they surrounded themselves with advisors who were the same way modern politicians keep economists on speed dial. But, regardless of who held the pen, these kings knew one thing. Books built nations. They'll each be awarded new manuscripts gifts that are both symbolic and practical. Knowledge here isn't just something you gain, something you earn and then pass on. Not in the European sense, he wears no crown. But his bearing is unmistakable. You see reverence for knowledge, for memory, for the written word. These aren't rulers obsessed with conquest. He's listening as two scholars debate a clause in Islamic inheritance law. And if they guard it well, that empire will outlast even the richest trade caravans. He doesn't interrupt. He waits, then asks a question that forces both men to backtrack and reconsider their logic. But notes like "May this guide my heirs when I am gone," or "Let this outlive my house," they weren't just collecting books. He's not performing intelligence, he lives it. He recites, not from memory, but from an open scroll that rests on his lap. He's reading the epic of a local hero, a blend of myth and history, where ancient spirits guide righteous rulers through moral labyrinths. You re-inside the home of one of Mali's noble patrons of learning, men who ruled with pens in one hand and prayer beads in the other. It wasn't just a flex, it was a credential. Knowing the law was good. Knowing you studied under someone who studied under Ibn Rushd, that made you a legend. A royal procession is approaching. But this isn't just ceremonial. Here, knowledge isn't just admit, it's policy. You arrive at a grand adobe residence just as the heat begins to drop and golden light spills across its sandstone walls. Inside, the air is cool and perfumed. You pass rooms lined with carpets and low seating. No thrones, no peacock feathers. In one corner, two older men argue over a treatise on jurisprudence. And here's where the magic happens. Royal power and scholarly wisdom don't clash, they dance. The rulers of Mali, particularly during Timbuktu's golden age, believed knowledge legitimized authority. It wasn't enough to be rich. You had to understand justice, ethics, trade law, and the movement of stars. You had to know things. One figure towers above them, Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, who ruled in the early 1300s. You've heard of him before, usually in headlines that declare him the richest man in history. But that's only half the truth. The other half, he was a book guy. After his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, where he reportedly distributed so much gold that he tanked Cairo's economy for years, Mansa Musa returns not just with treasure, but with architects, scholars, and manuscripts. You follow a servant through a narrow hallway lit by flickering oil lamps, until you reach a shaded courtyard. Here's your quirky fact for tonight. Some of the royal family members in Timbuktu were so obsessed with intellectual lineage that they tracked which scholars their tutors studied under, going back multiple generations. You pass into another room, more opulent than the last. The cushions are embroidered. The manuscripts are older, thicker. Historians still debate how literate the average ruler of Mali truly was. Some believe men like Mansa Musa were deeply versed in Islamic jurisprudence and philosophy. You step out into the evening air, just as drums begin to thrum faintly in the distance. Tonight, the king is heading to witness the graduation of 3 senior scholars. As the procession glides past, you see more than just wealth. They're caretakers of an invisible empire, one of ethics, ideas, and education, the fringe detail that sticks with you. Some royal patrons in Timbuktu were known to inscribe their manuscripts with personalized dedications, not just their names. They were building legacy libraries, little vaults of immortality, one scroll at a time. You walk back through the winding streets under a moon bright enough to cast shadows. The marketplace has quieted, but here and there, light still glows behind closed doors. Somewhere, a noble is rereading a passage by candlelight. Somewhere else, a child of that noble might be sneaking a look at the astronomy scrolls, hoping no one notices. And you realize you're walking through the pages of a civilization that valued questions more than certainty, debate more than dominance, and curiosity more than conquest. In Timbuktu, royalty and scholarship walked hand in hand, and in that union, something magnificent bloomed. You wake into a memory so deep, it almost forgets you're dreaming. The city is quiet, now not silent, but contemplative, as if it knows something is coming, as if, for the first time in centuries, it fears being forgotten. But for now, the sun still rises over Tim. Then he opens a chest the size of a cradle, lifts a linen-wrapped bundle, and with the gentleness of a man holding a bird, reveals a manuscript older than any cathedral you've ever stood in. And as it does, you're re-invited into a part of the city where stories are passed down, they regarded. A man in his 60s greets you with a smile that's seen centuries. His name doesn't matter, but his role does. He's a manuscript keeper. His father was one, his grandfather too. Either way, one thing is clear. The people of Timbuktu protected their books, like other cities protect their kings. You get the feeling, the books here know more family history than any family member alive. He's on his way to deliver it to another household. "I'm just a messenger," he says. But you know better. That bundle is part of a centuries-old relay race. Manuscripts moving silently from house to house. They lived in cupboards, in chests, beneath prayer mats. She wears a deep indigo shawl and walks with the grace of someone who has carried knowledge longer than her own memories. Her library isn't large, just one shelf. It's about living, it's about memory. But the proof is there. If you look closely enough, ink left behind by hands that refuse to be erased. She shakes her head gently. "They always want to take," she says, "but they never asked why we kept them." But the scroll she unrolls for you is breathtaking. Collection of poems in Arabic and Songhai, annotated by 3 generations of women. Because in Timbuktu, curiosity isn't an exception. It's an expectation. It's not just about what written it's about the hunger that drove someone to write it down. You pull your scarf tighter and glance over your shoulder. A house, a library, a life. You're not sure which. Children grow up not just being told what to learn, but how to ask. Why this? What if that? Could it be otherwise? Each line bears a different ink, a different hand, a different voice. In homes where children grew up playing tag around stacks of ancient philosophy, where bedtime stories sometimes involved tales from 9th century, physicians, or debates between scholars who died before Columbus was even born, narrow passages like script, courtyards like paragraphs, Every home, a page, folded into the binding of history, and you're walking along the lines, decoding a civilization one dusty footstep at a time, safe from weather, safe from colonizers, safe from flame. But behind many of these walls are secret libraries' rooms, filled not with treasure, but with thoughts. When modern researchers discovered them, the texts were remarkably well preserved. Because yes, goat sheds can be libraries if you're desperate enough. And thoughts, when you live in a world constantly changing hands, are easier to smuggle than gold. The script elegant, looping Arabic curves across the page like the Sahel wind. It's a treatise or ethics in trade, written by a merchant scholar who once bartered Sultan manuscripts in the same breath. There are margin notes in a different hand perhaps. The author's son, or his student. Little stars mark key passages. One line is underlined 3 times. A dishonest deal is a wound to the soul, not behind iron doors or stone vaults, but inside families, generations of scribes, scholars, and secret keepers who've preserved knowledge like a sacred flame, never letting it go out. You step into the cool, dim interior of a private home, where the walls are thick and the windows are tiny slits. He leads you down a narrow staircase into a basement where the temperature drops suddenly. It smells of cedar and ancient ink. Someone sealed it in a clay jar when invaders came. Someone whispered to their child, "This must never be lost." He smiles again. "This one," he says softly, "has never left this room." You glance down. The ink is brown, faded. That manuscript has survived conquest, sandstorms, and time itself because someone cared. Someone tucked it into the folds of a robe, and it wasn't. Historians still argue whether the great manuscript rescue operations of Timbuktu were planned centuries ahead or emerged spontaneously when threats appeared. You're now walking through the quieter lanes of the city, past homes that don't look special from the outside. Mud brick, muddis, windows like slits. You meet a boy no older than 12, cradling a bundle wrapped in indigo fabric. Here's your quirky tidbit. One Timbuktu family is rumored to have hidden dozens of manuscripts inside dried gourds, sealed with wax, and buried them in the walls of their goat shed. Some of the most important documents weren't even stored in libraries at all. You're invited into another home, this one belonging to a woman in her 70s. This one, she says, tapping a faded passage, was written by my grandmother. She added a verse about the rains. And just like that, you realize, Timbuktu's manuscript culture isn't only about theology and law. Historians still debate how many manuscripts were written by women, or how many texts carried female voices in their margins. You ask the old woman if she's ever considered donating the manuscript to a museum. That silence lands heavy. You step back into the street, and suddenly the city feels like a breathing manuscript itself. And here's the strangest thing. No one here seems surprised by your curiosity. That's the heartbeat behind every manuscript, every faded line, every secret library. The wind kicks up, and sand swirls through the air like a whisper. Because in Timbuktu, they're all the same thing. The heat rises early today, curling off the clay rooftops like incense. You wipe a bead of sweat from your brow and squint at the city around you, still quiet, still dignified. So now, step by step, you trace the veins that fed this city's heart. The Trans-Saharan trade routes, where gold glittered, salt shone, and knowledge rode on camelback. But this morning, you're not here to study. It's wide, flat, and worn smooth by centuries of hooves and sandaled feet. They're loaded with good slabs of rock salt from Taldany, ivory, ostrich feathers, cola nuts, copper, incense, and of course, manuscripts. You blink. Yep. Even here, out in the desert, books are cargo, swaddled in leather, tied in cloth. jostled gently against the desert's breath. Travelers would leave cryptic messages etched into cliff faces or drawn with stones in the sand. Danger ahead. Well, 3 days out, half full. Think of it like a medieval Wi-Fi signal, but slower, dustier, and requiring significantly more camel food. Along this route, Islamic scholars traveled with crates of manuscripts, while gold merchants walked beside them, bartering nuggets the size of almonds. Avoid this route, bandits. One ancient graffiti simply reads, "Don't trust the man with no camel. It doesn't look like much, just another dusty road through endless Timbuktu." This was once the broadband of the medieval world. You're here to follow the routes that made all this possible. But the lyrics, they're lines from a 12th century poem on the nature of time. It was about moving, meaning it connected cities. Yes, but more importantly, it connected minds. A scholar in Timbuktu could read a theory developed in Damascus. A child here could recite a poem born in Persia, and none of it would have been possible without sand, sweat, and the slow patience of those who knew how to navigate both. They sing of stars collapsing, hearts wandering, and camels dreaming. Somehow, it all makes sense. The towers of the Jingaba Mosque rise like bookmarks against the sky. You hear the soft bleating of goats, the muffled laughter of traders sharing one last joke, the distant hiss of tea being poured. A trader could buy a servant with 2 slabs of the stuff. He guards his pile like a dragon hoarding treasure. Someone asks if it's Egyptian. He grins. And blessed by the Nile, you run your hand across one now a rough-edged rectangle as heavy as regret. It sparkles faintly in the light. You lick your fingertip and touch the surface. It's a node, a glowing ember in a vast network of knowledge. And every path that leads, hear every caravan track, every merchant's tale, every scribbled margin is a reminder that some roads don't just carry people. Still salty, still sacred. Timbuktu didn't exist in a vacuum. No oasis survives on good intentions. No library thrives without roads. Traders are arriving from across the desert, their goods wrapped in goat hide, their stories fresher than the dates they carry. You overhear one man describe a sandstorm that swallowed a whole caravan. Another tells of a rare green meteor that lit up the sky near Gao. These are the men who memorize constellations for navigation. Who knew which wells were sweet and which dunes shifted with the wind? A trader might scribble a new margin note on a medical scroll. A scholar might correct a phrase in a copied poem. Timbuktu's texts weren't frozen. They evolved. They were living things, shaped by the hands that carried them. Either way, they were the lifeblood of movement. It's nothing fancy. A central courtyard, a shaded awning, water jugs cooled with wet cloth, but it's alive with conversation. Merchants from Morocco, Cairo, Kano, and even the Sols. Far corners sit cross-legged and exchange more than currency. They swap gossip, scientific theories, jokes about bureaucrats in Cairo. One leans close and whispers, "Did you hear that a man in Tuwat claims he found a fossil in the cliffs?" Another, "Probably just an unlucky goat." Without the caravan leaders, books would have gathered dust in North African ports, never reaching the minds that craved them here. Without them, Timbuktu's golden era wouldn't just be unlikely, it'd be impossible. You leave through the city's western gate and follow a caravan trail. Camels sway in the distance, like ships on a waveless ocean. And who leads the way? The Tuareg nomads of the Sahara, veiled in indigo and silent as shadow. They don't just know the desert, they are the desert. Historians still argue whether the Tuareg were purely facilitators or also cultural contributors. Did they simply move goods or also shape ideas? You trudge onward, stopping at a caravanserai desert in 4 travelers. And then comes the fringe fact that makes your eyebrows jump. Some trade routes included coded signs carved into rock, a kind of Saharan shorthand. The road you follow was never just about Timbuktu. It was part of a vast network stretching from the gold mines of Bambouk to the scholarly halls of Fez. The salt was priceless. In fact, salt was so valuable in Timbuktu that it was sometimes used as currency. You arrive at a makeshift open-air market just beyond the city walls. But here's the kicker. Manuscripts were often part of these tailies. Because every journey changed the text, you spot a boy selling paper. Real paper, not bark or hide, imported from the north. Expensive, soft, precious. Your quirky moment arrives when a group of traders break into a Sangha rhythmic chant used to keep pace on camel treks, and in that moment you realize this network of trade wasn't just about moving goods. As the sun begins to sink, you make your way back to the city. Timbuktu, you'll now see, isn't an isolated dot on a forgotten map. They carry civilizations. The night air falls heavy and soft, like velvet soaked in dust and silence. You're back in the city now, but the stars above remind you of the desert the ones the Tuareg used to follow, and the scholars tried to name. He lived in the late 16th century, a time when the city was still holding its ground. Even as foreign powers loomed on the horizon, you sit cross-legged in a recreated study, room bare, except for cushions, books, and the unmistakable aura of obsession. The air smells like dust and ink. You can almost hear the scratching of his quill. Even in Morocco, the scholars respected him. They debated him. They feared his logic and envied his recall. He didn't just quote books, he inhaled them. Here, dozens of anonymous scribes once sat in silence, copying texts by oil lamp. Because yes, the scribes often read aloud as they wrote. It was believed to help memory. And some said the words themselves settled better on the page when spoken into the air. You try it softly and feel a strange calm rise in your chest. Not for profit, not even for personal fame, just because the world needed more books. You're struck by something. None of this was done for fame. Timbuktu's scholars weren't chasing likes or followers. They were chasing clarity, a better understanding of justice, of time, of the stars, of God. You pick one up. It's a fragment of a poem, maybe unfinished, maybe just abandoned. The last line reads, "Even in silence, knowledge speaks louder than kings." You don't know if that's philosophy or poetry. You try to imagine what it must have felt like to live in a place where curiosity was currency, where your questions mattered more than your clothes, where your worth was measured in ink, probably both. They shared it, copied it, risked their lives to protect it. And now, centuries later, the world is still unrolling those scrolls and marveling at the minds who shaped them. One infamous scribe added, "If anyone recites this wrongly, may their teeth fall out." You just need to sit quietly, a little dramatic, but fair. Copying books by hand makes you very protective. You watch one scribe dip his red pen into a bowl of ink made from acacia bark and soot. He draws each letter slowly, as if coaxing it from the paper. One scholar praises a method of astronomy, another calls it heresy. One insists that poetry must serve religious devotion. Another defends it as an art of its own. The city didn't hide its disagreements. It preserved them. Every page he finishes will be wrapped, stored, and perhaps never read in his lifetime. That's faith copying what you might never see used. It feels like a good time to go deeper. Not outward anymore, but inward. Into the minds behind the manuscripts, the thinkers, the scribes, and the eccentric geniuses who turned Timbuktu from a trade stop into a brain trust. Was it the desert's openness, the traders, or simply the fact that Timbuktu knew that truth needs pressure like diamonds do. One source claims he wept not because he was captured, but because his books were touched without reverence. The teacher at the center, the students around him or her, often outdoors, often informal. No lecture halls, no podiums, just voices rising into the air like prayers. Imagine that. You lose your freedom, and the thing you mourn most is someone creasing the wrong page. You start in the home of Ahmad Baba, the most famous scholar Timbuktu ever produced. Ahmad Baba wasn't just a book collector. He was a philosopher, a legal expert, and a stubborn critic of colonial interference. He wrote over 40 known works, many lost. Some preserved on subjects ranging from Islamic jurisprudence to linguistics to the ethics of slavery. His opinions were sharp enough to get him exiled to Morocco, where even the Sultan admitted this man's mind is a threat. And here is your strange little fringe fact. Legend has it that when Moroccan forces occupied Timbuktu, they found Ahmad Baba's private library, which reportedly contained over 1,600 volumes. Historians still argue whether Ahmad Baba's exile was more political than religious. But what no one debates is his intellect. You move from his home to a scriptorium, one of the quiet copying rooms scattered around the city. This room is warmer than you'd expect, filled with the murmur of quiet recitation. A nearby shelf holds discarded page, smudged ink, crumpled starts, not bad for someone no one remembers. And now the quirky tidbit. Some scribes left tiny drawings or signatures in the margins of their work, tiny doodles of animals, notes about the weather that day, even complaints. You step outside into the dawn, the first light breaking like soft breath across the city. And this clarity didn't come easy. Some texts here contradict others. Historians still puzzled over this tolerance. How did a society so rooted in Islamic law also entertain such wide-ranging debate? You walk through a narrow alley where teachers once sat with their students, reading aloud from scrolls. The custom was called Halaha, circle of learning. One student asks, "Why does time move forward?" The teacher answers, "Because it has a destination." You sit down beside a crumbling wall and close your eyes, and maybe the most beautiful thought of all, the city's brightest minds didn't hoard their wisdom. You lean back against the sun-warmed stone and smile, because in Timbuktu, you don't need to visit a museum to find Brit. And listen, you've spent time in the dusty halls, the secret libraries, the scriptoriums and marketplaces of Timbuktu, but now you're going to the edge, the literal edge where books become fragile and history gets blurry. Tonight, you meet the enemy of every manuscript. Time and time. Here in the Sahel doesn't just tick. It eats paper for breakfast and invites termites to dinner. You find yourself standing in front of a modest clay building, no more than 2 rooms deep. But inside is a private archive, and the keeper is a man with hands stained by centuries. Stacked along the walls are boxes, real wooden boxes, carved with basic tools, nothing fancy. This survived the invasion, he says. You ask, which invasion? He shrugs. Pick one. But what they agree on, Timbuktu's people resisted. Every time someone tried to erase them, they wear gloves, speak in whispers, and handle books like they're newborns. One is brushing mold from a page with a squirrel hairbrush. Another is typing out a transcription in 3 languages. A third is using a UV light to reveal hidden ink. The page glows. You're not hallucinating. Some inks oxidize over time, becoming invisible until coaxed back with heat or light. While many of Timbuktu's families are cooperating with archivists, some remain protective, rightfully so, after centuries of outsiders coming to take without asking. The keeper walks you to the edge of the compound and points to a low, distant building. That family, he says, has a manuscript on astronomy we've never seen before, but they won't bring it out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The scrolls wrapped in indigo and passed down like jewelry. The boy in the marketplace, trading salt for paper, and you realize this isn't a library in the traditional sense. Others simply don't have the resources. Manuscripts sit in storage closets, under beds, in clay jars, growing brittle with every passing season. Ordinary people holding history in their closets. Inside, a single candle still flickers beside a partially unrolled manuscript. You can't read the text, but you don't need to. Between Moroccan troops, French colonizers, and modern insurgent groups, Timbuktu has had more liberators than it asked for. A young archivist has uncovered a page believed lost, a 14th century commentary on law, hidden between the binding of a different book. The idea was to repel insects and resist rot. It didn't always work, but when it did, those books outlived the kingdoms that wrote them. It had been sitting unnoticed for decades, maybe centuries, bound alongside a completely unrelated text. You laugh. Others use glyphs or shorthand specific to a region or tribe. Some are clear. Others are coded or full of symbols that even today no one fully understands. Timbuktu's manuscripts are like those nesting dolls always, something hidden inside something else, and every one of them brought risk to the libraries. Conquest is rarely kind to paper. Inside, wrapped in cloth or goatskin, lie the manuscripts, cracked, faded, often illegible, but precious. So precious, his fingers are dark with ink and dust, his nails clipped short, his knuckles worn from lifting boxes wrapped in faded linen, but when he lifts it toward the light, the words peek through. It's a passage on astronomy, something about the phases of Venus. You catch only pieces, but somehow that's enough. He invites you in with a nod, and you step into a vault of crumbling paper. The air smells strange, like old tree bark, candle soot, and something vaguely sweet. Maybe glue, maybe decay. The man shows you a page. It's barely readable. Water damage blots the ink. The edges are chewed away. Here's a somber fringe fact for you. Timbuktu once held between 300,000 to 700,000 manuscripts, but nobody knows how many have been lost to fire, humidity, insects, or simply being forgotten. Some of the city's oldest texts now exist only in fragments, stored like relics, waiting for someone with enough patience to coax them back into meaning. The keeper shows you a second scroll, this one blackened at the corners. Historians still argue whether the city's great library losses came mostly from colonial neglect, from ancient mishandling, or from recent violence. You walk down a corridor now, into a storage room where volunteers work under yellow light. You hear a murmur of excitement, and then comes your quirky detail of the night. Some ancient scribes used natural preservatives, including crocodile oil, to coat the leather covers of their The archivists tell you about their cataloging challenges. Some manuscripts are in Arabic, but others mix in Ajami African languages written in Arabic script. And here's the heartbreak. The cataloging race isn't fast enough. You step outside again, the desert wind sliding over your skin like silk. You understand. These books are more than paper. They're memory. And memory doesn't respond well to pressure. There's something humbling about realizing that the survival of 500,000 manuscripts depends not on museums or governments but on grandmothers, school children, and local Brit. You think back to the chest buried beneath a goat shed. This is a living archive, held together not by stone but by trust, by breath, by patience, and it's still alive. For now, as the sun sets, you walk the outer walls of the preservation center, watching the last light spill across mud brick and cloth. You already know what it says. Don't forget us. The moon is high now, casting soft silver light across the mud brick walls and flat rooftops. Timbuktu rests, but your mind does not. Tonight, you're peeling back yet another layer of this city's strange genius, one that often gets left out of textbooks. It's quiet radicalism. You make your way to a secluded courtyard, where the ghost of a long-forgotten lecture still seems to hang in the air. Here, a scholar could propose a theory so wild it made eyebrows twitch, and instead of being laughed out of town, they'd be offered tea. Marginalia scrawled in 5 different hands. It's a record of a theological debate on free will. One side argued that God predetermined everything. The other insisted humans held choice. They go back and forth, point by point, quoting Quranic verses, referencing Greek logic, citing earlier scholars. One famous example advised a ruler not to declare war, despite pressure. Another questioned a tax being levied on traders. These weren't rebel-rousers. They were legal experts, but their loyalty was to justice, not to whoever happened to be in charge. This used to be the entrance to one of Timbuktu's smaller above the doorway is a crumbling quote. Even if the sky is burning, do not stop reading. And at the end, a line reads simply, let each reader consult their heart. Low benches form a circle. Lanterns hang from dried wooden beams, and that means someone believed it might be needed one day. And the most potent texts were the ones that dared to say, what if things could be different? 2 boys play lawyers, arguing over an inheritance case. A girl, probably 10 or 11, plays the judge. She listens carefully. The city may look asleep, but in its corners, its shadows, and its scrolls, it's still arguing. Or what a Tuareg trader would think of global stock markets. You smile. They'd probably ask better questions than we do. Still wondering. Still testing its own beliefs. A few scholars in Timbuktu were rumored to have kept dream diaries, in which they recorded nocturnal visions and tried to interpret them using legal and philosophical frameworks. Some believed that dreams could carry divine insight. One famous teacher claimed he dreamed the same verse 3 nights in a row and, based on that, rewrote part of his legal opinion. Then she flips a page in a thick legal text and reads aloud. It is not wealth that defines justice, but balance in the eyes of God. The kids cheer. Even the pretend lawyers nod in approval. Only this time, you're led into a locked room. The librarian shows you a rare scroller, political treatise, written in the 1500s. Its author lays out a system of governance that limits royal authority, empowers judges, and emphasizes the role of scholars in checking power. The ruler, it says, must submit to truth, as the moon submits to the tides. You can almost hear the murmur of debate, calm, courteous, and race. You've already seen that Timbuktu treasured books, but what it also prized perhaps even more was the freedom to disagree. This was a place for argument. Not the Twitter kind no dunking, no rage replies. Real argument, intellectual sparring, philosophical wrestling. In one corner of the courtyard, you find a stack of old handwritten notes, bound together with faded string. But there's no doubt that Timbuktu encouraged questions. And questions, as you've probably noticed, have always been more dangerous than answers. One student was infamous for arguing that interest on loans wasn't always immoral a taboo position in Islamic law. Instead of being punished, he was asked to present evidence. He debated for 3 days, and while few agreed with him, the city still preserved his argument. Why? Because it mattered that someone asked. Historians still debate whether this culture of disagreement was systemic or selective, whether only elite scholars had this intellectual freedom, or if it extended more widely. You visit another courtyard now, where students once gathered to discuss law and social conduct. Now here is your fringe fact. Timbuktu scholars were some of the first in West Africa to write dissenting fatwas, religious rulings that opposed royal or public opinion, and that kind of integrity, rare, especially in the 15th century. You sit in on a mock trial being reenacted for a school group. You walk past a stone wall, etched with faded script, quirky detail for the night. Not everyone took these seriously, of course, but again no one burned them. The pages were kept, annotated, debated. Even dreams had a place in the conversation. You return now to one of the libraries you've visited before. You ask if this was ever implemented. The librarian chuckles. Not really, but it was copied. Timbuktu's power was never in its armies. It was in its paper. You walk the streets again. Slower this time, more aware of the ideas that swirl around you like unseen birds, and the wind whispers through the alley, as if saying, don't settle for easy answers. The hard questions are where the magic is. You'll glance at the stars. You wonder what Ahmed Baba might have said about social media, because in Timbuktu, even doubt was holy, even dissent was sacred. And in a world drowning in noise, maybe that's the most radical thing of all. You wake to the sound of a broom brushing sand from stone. Soft, rhythmic, almost meditative, the city is beginning to stir again slowly, deliberately. No rush. Timbuktu never hurries, because for all the knowledge this city held, for all the scrolls and scholars and careful logic, it's also a place wrapped in legend. A city whose name has become code for far away and unknowable. Even now, it lingers at the edge of imagination like a mirage. After all, it's been here for centuries. It can afford to take its time. Today, you're going to chase a whisper the myths and mysteries that swirl around Timbuktu like sand devils. A boy stands nearby, selling charms carved from bone. He tells you that if you bury one under your bed, it protects your dreams from thieves. You ask how a dream can be stolen. He just grins and says, you'd be surprised. And tonight, you're chasing the mirage. Here, someone retells the tale of the 7 invisible scribes, ghosts who appear during the dry season and copy missing pages from lost books. Their handwriting is said to be perfect. Their ink never fades. But no one has ever seen their faces. Was it correction? Censorship? Possession? No one knows. One scroll has 5 versions of the same passage. Each one slightly different in phrasing but identical in structure. One scholar speculated that it might have been a ritual rewriting truth until it becomes truer. One version of the story claims that Ahmed Baba summoned them himself. She says one scent, when worn at night, allows the wearer to visit the Library of Stars, a mythical structure where the constellations themselves keep records of everything ever forgotten. It was also what it dreamed, what it hoped, what it whispered between the lines. The scholars weren't just obsessed with law and astronomy. Its walls scorched from time, but inside, still somehow dry, are fragments of text scrawled on the inner walls, verses from a lost poem. One line reads, "The sands forget the footsteps, but never the weight." Many of them studied mysticism, Sufism in particular. They wrote about the nature of the soul, the sound of divine silence, the possibility of hidden knowledge revealed only in dreams or visions. And you wonder why no one ever came to erase them. Maybe because they felt true. Maybe because everyone saw them and quietly decided to leave them be. Somewhere else, a child is reciting a verse to the rhythm of their breath. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, You can still hear that buried library breathing beneath the earth. The books glow, she says, but only if you enter in silence. In 2014, there were reports of manuscripts hidden beneath the dunes outside Timbuktu by families trying to protect them from jihadist invaders. Below, Timbuktu glows under moonlight still, shimmering, real. But behind your eyes, something else glows too. A version of the city that exists only in stories. A place where invisible scribes still work, where books whisper in sleep, and where knowledge wears a veil of myth. Some were later found, yes, but others still missing. Another says they only appear to those who dream in verses. He says one of the scrolls contains the true name of Timand, that to read it aloud would unravel the world. But the fact remains. No one has ever found the bottom of Timbuktu's archives. There are still texts unaccounted for, still bundles wrapped too tightly to disturb, still rooms unopened for generations. Beneath them, a single line. Do not say these aloud, unless your heart is very clean. The children around you giggle, but they lean in closer, just in case. You begin at the city's edge, where old gates still stand arches of sun-baked clay, worn smooth by travelers long gone. Welcome to the folklore of Timbuktu. You move through the streets, past quiet homes and shuttered courtyards, and enter a gathering circle beneath a twisted baobab tree. An elder sits in the center, legs crossed, hands resting on a walking stick carved with stars and crescent moons. He begins to speak. And even though you don't know all the words, the rhythm pulls you in like a tide. He tells a story about a library buried under the city, guarded by spirits who whisper riddles in the ears of those who come too close. Historians still debate whether these legends stem from real hidden texts, perhaps early Islamic mysticism, or coded political treatises, or simply half-remembered dreams, and that uncertainty, that's where the mystery lives. You move to another gathering, this one in a shaded nook near the mosque. You laugh, but the storyteller doesn't. He nods solemnly and says, "Not everything that's invisible is false." And here's your quirky fringe detail. Some old manuscripts contain entire chapters, erased and sometimes repeatedly, by unknown hands. You pass through a narrow lane, where a woman sells hand-mixed perfume, oil, amber, myrrh, musk. It sounds like bedtime nonsense. And yet, you can't shake the feeling that maybe she's right. Because, here's the thing, Timbuktu was always more than what it wrote down. One manuscript in the Ahmad Barber Institute is just a list of names, hundreds of them each said to be one of the 99 secret names of God. You walk now toward a ruined house, its roof half collapsed. It stops you cold. You wonder if the poet lived here, if they wrote these words in a moment of loneliness, or joy, or terror. And here's the mystery. Even now, people search for lost libraries. You climb a small hill just outside the city, and maybe they're the same city. One physical, one remembered, one written in ink, the other in wonder. You sit in silence, letting the stars burn holes in the sky. Somewhere below you, someone is copying a page. Still alive, still waiting. You rise early, before even the roosters remember to crow, to meet a man who walks through history, not with words, but with fire and thread. He's a book restorer, and today you're stepping into the delicate art of keeping the past alive, one stitch, one breath, one brushstroke at a time. His workshop isn't much, just a mud brick room with a low wooden table, rolls of linen, twine. This, he says, was hidden in the ceiling of a mosque. The termites didn't get it, but time did, not for show, not for romance, just practical. Feathers don't leave scratches, Next comes the humidifier box, rigged with bowls of water and slatted trays to relax the paper just enough to flatten without tearing. You don't tell the manuscript what to do, he says. You ask it. The paper is brittle, its ink faded to the color of dried blood. The result smells earthy, almost sweet, and more than one apprentice has accidentally tasted it out of curiosity. There's a rhythm to it, almost musical. Each pull, each tug like embroidery, but with centuries at stake, a moldy edge gets frozen to stop growth. Then there's digitization photos, taken page by page, uploaded, backed up, shared globally. Just in case the next sandstorm forgets to be merciful. It's bitter, the restorer says. Ask me how I know. The leather cover is torn, and the binding is completely gone. Then he looks at you and says, but the ones that changed me, maybe 5. Some believe they came from Andalusia, others trace them back to Cairo, and still others suggest they're entirely homegrown past, down from scribe to apprentice like family recipes. Some pages vanish between one breath and the next. Some ink flees the paper like it never wanted to be remembered. And some stories, well, they just go. They're copying decorative headings, mimicking old calligraphy, laughing quietly as they critique each other's strokes. But the people here already have their answer. Both because preservation isn't just technical, it's cultural. You can't digitize memory. You can't scan reverence. You can't catalogue the warmth of a story whispered from grandfather to child at bedtime. Please read it. Please remember. One girl shows you her page. It's a passage from a 14th century text on river management. I like the metaphor, she says. It says, if the water forgets its bed, the land will forget the rain. It's cleaner now, restitched, re-sleeved, still fragile but breathing. He offers it to you like a priest offering a relic. What's clear is this: Timbuktu's book-saving know-how rivals any medieval monastery, and a variety of tools that look more like dentist equipment than anything literary. But in his hands, this humble setup is enough to rescue history. The man greets you with a gentle nod, his eyes soft and focused, as if even blinking too fast might damage a manuscript. Around the corner, another team is sorting new arrivals bundles of books, donated, rediscovered, or rescued. Some arrive tied in leather, others wrapped in old t-shirts. You watch one volunteer gently unfold a cloth to reveal nothing, just brittle fragments. Ash, she says softly. All that's left. He pulls out a worn manuscript wrapped in faded cloth. Your job. Watch, listen, learn. First, he brushes the pages gently with a feather. You laugh quietly, but you understand what he means. Historians still debate the exact origins of many Timbuktu restoration techniques. It tracked lunar cycles, planting seasons, and even wedding days. You peer closer. Sure enough, in the margin, someone has scrawled an aimé second, a date circled 3 times, a love story in a ledger. You imagine a farmer flipping through this dusty book 100 years ago, saying, yeah, my daughter should marry when the moon is shy. The restorer points to a manuscript with gold leaf barely holding to the page. This one, he says, is a calendar, your quirky tidbit for the day. Some restoration work in Timbuktu has included remixing animal glue with powdered baobab bark, which acts as a mild fungicide. He walks you through the binding process. Small, even holes pricked into the spine of the parchment, linen threads soaked in water, pulled tight and knotted by hand. Some manuscripts are too far gone to be restored. For those, the goal is simply stabilization to stop the decay from spreading. A cracked page gets slipped between rice paper sheets. You ask him how many books he's saved. He shrugs. A few hundred, maybe more. Depends how you define saving. You get the feeling that restoring a book is as much about the restorer as the text. You move now to the back of the workshop, where a group of teenage apprentices are hunched over practiced manuscripts. That's good. That's very good. You'll step outside, where the sun has climbed high and the workshop's clay walls seem to glow from within, and that's the hardest part. You can't save everything. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's manuscript culture is best protected by local families or global institutions. And you certainly can't replace the love it takes to sew a page back to life. The restorer returns, holding a fresh copy of the calendar book. You touch it gently. You feel the texture of time. And in that moment, you realize saving a book is an act of faith. It's telling the future, here, I saved this for you. You leave the workshop in silence, your feet slow, your breath careful, your heart heavy in the best way. Timbuktu doesn't just teach, it preserves. Not because the past is better, but because the past still has things to say. You're standing at a crossroads, now not a metaphorical one, a literal one, right? Where two of Timbuktu's ancient trade paths intersect in the dust. To your left, the road to Gao. To your right, the long trail toward Mauritania. But you're not going down either path tonight. Instead, you're going to follow the journey of the manuscripts themselves. Beyond Timbuktu's walls, as they move from secret shelves to global spotlights, because here is something you may not have realized. Timbuktu's story didn't end when the city faded from the maps. Its manuscripts went on to have lives of their own, and encouraged ordinary citizens, librarians, even teenagers, began secretly evacuating manuscripts, bundling them in cloth, hiding them in rice sacks, loading them onto donkey carts, moving them by night, one dusty trip at a time. Others sat quietly in family trunks for generations before being rediscovered by curious grandchildren. And some nearly didn't survive at all. It's not a technical chart, it's a cosmic poem, blending astrology and astronomy, warning travelers about invisible forces and invisible fears. It begins, walk gently, for the sky keeps secrets. You copy the phrase into your notebook, unsure if it's science, myth, or a bit of both. Some traveled in leather satchels, smuggled out during colonial rule. One volunteer claimed they disguised manuscripts as loaves of bread. This is the digitization hub. High-resolution cameras capture every brittle page. Metadata is added. Translations. Some of the texts sent abroad have sparked global rethinks of African history, like the 16th century legal opinion refuting the slave trade, or the 14th century medical text describing cataract surgery techniques similar to early European ones. Timbuktu wasn't borrowing from the world. You pass a school where children recite verses, some in Arabic, some in some. One boy holds up a scroll and asks his friend, "Do you think they had jokes back then?" His friend shrugs. "I hope so." One researcher in Berlin spent 3 years decoding a Timbuktu manuscript on water purification, only to find it included a warning against deforestation centuries before the word climate change existed. You sit, he pours you a glass, and between sips you talk about manuscripts, about fire, about memory. From here, the manuscripts make their way into online archives acts, now by scholars from Tokyo to Toronto, the city that was once a mystery to the world, now teaching the world. It's the stubborn belief that knowledge is worth saving even when the world forgets, even when the flames come, even when all you have is a cloth, a cart, and a secret. What words were never lost, just waiting for someone to listen. "Nobody checks bread," he said, grinning. They just assume you're hungry. One of their first targets, the libraries. Knowledge, as always, posed a threat. They began torching manuscripts, pages of philosophy, law, medicine, poetry, some dating back over 700 years. Let's rewind to 2012. Armed militants swept through northern Mali, including Timbuktu, bringing with them a bitter cocktail of ideology and fire. And here's where the miracle happens. The people of Timbuktu fought back not with weapons, but with boxes. Still, others ask, what good is saving knowledge if it's locked behind glass? There are no easy answers, but one thing is clear. Timbuktu's texts must be read, not just preserved. Over 350,000 manuscripts smuggled out, mostly to Bamako, the capital. That's one of the greatest literary rescues in history, and most of the world barely noticed. One young woman shows you a registry where each returned manuscript is logged by hand. She smiles and says, "When we finish this, I want to open a school." But first we have to listen to the old voices. Historians still argue over the exact number saved, but the estimate, the quirky part. Some families used refrigerator boxes to carry the texts, others stuffed books into pillowcases. You step into a modest building in Timbuktu's outskirts, where a new generation of archivists is documenting what's left and what was saved. She flips open a page to show you a map of stars drawn in indigo ink. That's Timbuktu in a sentence. You move now to a room filled with scanners and white gloves. But here's the twist. Timbuktu's manuscripts didn't just migrate across borders. They challenged minds. It was contributing to it, and scholars are still translating, still discovering. That brings us to the uncomfortable question. What happens now? Some say the manuscripts should remain in Mali, protected and studied locally. Others argue for international safekeeping. You take a slow walk back into the city, where the walls feel warmer than before, maybe because you now understand what they've endured. You hope so too, because, yes, Timbuktu gave us law and astronomy and philosophy, but it also gave us poetry, dreams, and probably a few very good puns lost to time. You stop by a corner tea stand, where an old man is stirring sugar into a cup, with the kind of deliberation that only comes with age and perfect timing. He says, "Paper can burn, but not words," and you believe him. As night falls once more, you realize this city's most powerful legacy isn't its books, its mosques, or even its mysteries. You finish your tea, you thank the man, and as you walk back into the sleeping city, you wonder what pages are still waiting to be found. What truths are still wrapped in linen? The air tonight is softer than usual, more still, more listening. You can feel it. Timbuktu has stopped whispering, just for a moment, as if inviting you to reflect on everything you've uncovered, and it's not done with you yet, because now you're going to step away from the scrolls and the sages, just briefly, to ask, what does all of this mean for the world beyond these walls? You're in a courtyard, again different from the others. This one belongs to a small modern school built next to an older madrasa, two worlds side by side. A mural stretches across the wall, depicting a scribe sitting beneath a tree, holding a scroll out to a child. The tree is blooming. Even though this is the Sahel, it's a metaphor, and not a subtle one. Inside, the teacher is reading from a manuscript, not an original, but a copy. It's a poem. You catch the last lines. Let the ink not dry on truth. You pass shelves filled with restored manuscripts, stacked, translated, waiting. In one corner sits a scanner still warm from use. You don't understand the script, but next to it is a small card with a translated line. To care for the body is to honor the soul's vessel. Here is your final strange little fact of the night. One manuscript discovered in 2016 contained the first known West African recipe for preserving watermelon. You stop at a shop where a teenager is drawing verses in the sand with a stick, erasing them before anyone else can read them. When you ask why, he says, "Because it's fun to know something no one else does." It involved burying the rind in clay and keeping it near cool rocks. It may not be gourmet, but it proves the point. Nothing was beneath the dignity of being written down, whether it was law, love, the moon or melon. A scholar hums as she inputs metadata for a 16th century commentary on justice, and lets silence never keep the door closed. That's Timbuktu in 2 lines. Defiant, delicate, and deeply hopeful. You sit with the children afterward. One girl asks you, "Is it true the people who wrote these books thought they could hear the stars?" You nod. Because why not? They believed sound had a shape, that time could be drawn, and that ideas could live longer than empires. It's the grandmother who keeps a scroll in her kitchen wrapped in cooking cloth. There's no sound but the occasional breath of the wind, soft and warm, curling past the stories you've collected tonight. It's the schoolteacher who tells a room of 9-year-olds that the best library in the world might be inside them already. What matters is that you felt them, that somewhere in the quiet, the spirit of this city, the pages, the voices, the soft resilience found a place to settle in you. She looks satisfied. I want to write like that someday. The scrolls are wrapped tight in cloth and tucked away, but they're not gone. That someone else, maybe just yesterday, risked everything to keep it from burning. Let the sand grow still. Let the wind hush its stories. That across centuries and continents, the human urge to understand, to remember, to share never stopped. In the distance, a boat glides past, low and quiet. You imagine it filled with book scrolls packed beside fishnets, knowledge floating toward somewhere new. That's what these manuscripts were always meant to do. Travel, speak, endure, and there it is, the point. Your thoughts, too. It's the stillness that only comes after knowing something deeply. You lean against the stone wall, close your eyes, and for a second, just one, you swear you hear it. The scratching of a reed pen on parchment. A low murmur of a verse repeated, the flicker of candlelight through a library door cracked open just wide enough for curiosity to slip through. Because Timbuktu isn't just history, it's inheritance. Not just a place to study, but a place to emulate. But tonight, you don't care about the fall. You care about the fact that it rose in the first place and left a trail of light behind. A blueprint for what happens when books matter more than borders, when ideas are sacred, and when communities trust ordinary people to carry extraordinary truths. You move now to the Ahmed Baba Institute one last time, slipping through its quiet corridors as twilight drips down the walls. Historians still debate whether Timbuktu's decline came from colonial neglect, economic shifts, climate change, or simply the inevitable cycle of great cities. You pause before a display case, holding one of the oldest texts they've found, a page on medicine. Timbuktu wasn't just academic, it was compassionate and quirky, too. You exit the institute and walk the streets once more, passing doorways framed by stars and moons carved in wood. Fair enough. Timbuktu's legacy isn't just dusty books. It's this. It's the boy with his sand poems. You walk to the river's edge, where the Niger has curved its way through the desert for thousands of years. As the moon rises, you find your breath slowing, and maybe that's how Timbuktu survives, not as a ruin, but as a rhythm. Not as a relic, but as a reminder that ideas are fragile, but they're also wild. That stories are vulnerable, but they fight back, and that somewhere, even now, a child might be copying a verse in the sand, and that verse could outlast empires. Now, Let all that melt into stillness. You're lying back beneath a sky without corners. The desert stretches out around you like a thought that hasn't ended yet. It's okay to forget some of them. That's what stories are for. They linger, whether you hold onto every word or not. You don't need to remember the names, or the dates, or the laws. Just remember that someone, hundreds of years ago, sat by candlelight and wrote something they hoped would last. Now breathe. The fire has gone out. The ink has dried. They're resting, and so can you. Let the last flicker of the stars fade gently behind your eyes. You're safe. You're home. You're exactly where you're meant to be. Good night, sleep well.